that couldn't be on it, especially the East Coast doctors that have Tuesday afternoon hours. A lot of them couldn't be on it, so we'll have this recorded so that you'll be able to listen to it. And it's a good coaching call that we're going to do today, because we're going to cover a lot of the lab work. And there's always a lot of questions, not only from the clinical side of the labs, but also from the implementation side of the labs. How do I get my lab set up? How do I refer patients to the labs? Do I send them to their primary care doctor for the labs, or should I use, the lab that we set up through LabCorp or your own lab? So we're going to touch on a lot of that information today. So first thing I want to do is go into Module C. So one of the things that we're excited about is Laura and I had sat down today, and we are really formalizing the coaching call process so that we revolve around these modules, so you know the information and resources that are in the modules, and not only know the information, but know how this should be facilitated in your practice to make 8 Weeks to Wellness successful. So one of the things that we'll do today, guys, is Laura and I made a decision that we're not going to cover as broad a content for these coaching calls, so that we can really lead this coaching call sometime at the end for your questions and answers, whether it's relevant to the information we cover on the coaching call, or whether you have any other pressing issues or things that you want to ask that are related to 8 Weeks to Wellness. Okay? So let's dig in here. One of the things I want you guys to see in the Finding a Lab and Interpreting Lab Work is there's some documents and a YouTube video. And there's also a PDF of your LabCorp attachment or your setup information. So recognize that when we started 8 Weeks to Wellness, we formed a relationship with a company called Health Network Labs. So we had, and this is basically what we had taught to the doctors initially, that when you go out to find a lab, you basically want to connect with a lab so that you can refer them business. And we have a whole protocol of lab work that we've developed through 8 Weeks to Wellness, so that we can look at basically 3 to 4 issues going on with your patients. And these are very common problems, not normal, but very common problems that you're going to see in your patients, from their blood work perspective, and that is dysglycemia, sugar problems, dyslipidemia or lipid problems, and then also inflammation and problems with detoxification. So we really cover a broad spectrum of things on the lab work that are very functional in nature. They paint a picture, and they also are able to predict some outcomes, looking at metabolic syndrome and looking at inflammation if that person is headed towards, a chronic disease like diabetes or like heart disease or even site-specific cancer. So I personally love using the lab work. And again, some chiropractors are very leery of using lab work because it's very medically based. But recognize it's what you do with the information. We use that information so that we can put them through a chiropractic program to get them off their medications. The medical profession uses lab work so they can put people on more pharmaceuticals. We use it to show them that a chiropractic lifestyle that includes proper nutrition and exercise and good supplementation can actually bring people's lab values back to normal, so they can get off the medications that have these bad side effects. Okay, so some of the documents that you'll see on here is there's the first one is a non-LabCorp lab request script. So this is your general, and let me see if I can open this up. But this is going to list exactly what are the labs that we recommend for a patient. And what you can do is, if you're using your own lab, this is what you want to use for your lab work to send to your lab. So some of you have jumped on and started using LabCorp through our corporate account, which I'll touch on in a moment. But if you aren't using LabCorp, and you know what, guys, this is downloading way too slow. Just when you get a chance, you can download that if you're not using LabCorp. The lab info letter is the letter that goes to the patient that explains labs. So recognize that when you're sending patients for a lab, you should have an information letter that tells them exactly why you want them to have labs, what lab you use, what's the process for getting that, how their insurance is billed through the lab, how they need to check with the lab first to make sure that their lab is covered through their insurance. So it's literally an informational letter that you should use. Now what we do in our office is we've switched from using Health Network Labs to using LabCorp. And let me just touch on LabCorp for just a minute. When we went out to try to develop a relationship with a national lab so that it would make it easier for you guys to have a lab to use as a resource for your patients, health network labs who were using at the time did not have the kind of breadth of labs that we needed. They were only in about 17 states. So we started researching other labs like Quest and also LabCorp that were huge national chain labs. And LabCorp structured the best deal with us. So we get our 8 weeks to wellness blood work for $135. And that's about as competitive as a rate as you're going to get. So recognize that for everything, the insulin, homocysteine is a very expensive test. That's included all of your lipid profile, all of your blood glucose profiles. You get all of that for $135 if it's a cash patient. If it's an insurance patient where their insurance is covered under LabCorp, LabCorp will do the billing. But it's very important to language to the patient that they need to call that particular LabCorp to find out if their insurance is going to cover the LabCorp. And you can tell them, and this is what I tell my patients, that most of the time, 90% of the time, your insurance will cover LabCorp, but we want you to verify just to make sure. If it doesn't cover, the lab is not a huge expense. It's $135 for a cash patient. Now, when we set up and when you fill out, if you've done this, if you fill out your LabCorp application, once they process that, guys, they'll send you a requisite form. And so we have our lab info letter attached to our requisite form where you fill in the patient's name, general information, and then there's 4 panels that you can select that are on the requisite form. One is the 8 weeks to wellness blood work, one is a male profile, one is a female profile, and one is a thyroid panel. Now the cost, and I'm not positive, if you want the cost for the cash patient for those other profiles, please email Dr. Eric at dreric@8ww.com. He has that pricing. Again, they'll bill the insurance if they have insurance to cover the labs. But most of the time, obviously, you're going to run the 8 weeks to wellness blood work. Okay? So that's how that works. The lab info letter is attached to the lab requisite form, and both of those pieces of paper get given to the patient so that then they can find your lab. Now, on the back of the lab requisite form or the back of the lab info letter, it doesn't matter, you should have information about the LabCorp that's closest to you, maybe directions to the lab and also the lab's phone number, so it makes it convenient for the patient to call and to know where they go for their drawing. The other important thing to have on that is the hours. So, for example, last night when I was sending a patient, a new patient, he was an accountant, and he was worried that he wasn't going to be able to get his labs done until we looked at the hours, and they have 7 a.m. hours on Saturday. So they don't even need an appointment with LabCorp. They can go in and just have their blood drawn as long as they're going within the normal hours of the lab. And he was very happy that they had Saturday morning hours. So, again, you want to make it as convenient and easy as for the patient as possible. Okay? I think I covered most of the information that's on here. And by the way, when you fill out that LabCorp form, this PDF here, they will ask you whether you want to get your results via phone or via fax or email. And what I suggest is I have an account through a company called myfax.com, and I use it not only for LabCorp but for all my faxes. And this is a really nice service. It's $10 a month. But what they do is they give you a phone number, and then you can use that phone number to receive faxes, and it will take the fax and convert it to an email and email it to you. And that's great for me. It just saves on paper, and it's just much more convenient. It's called MyFax. So you can go to myfax.com and set up that account. I had LabCorp email or actually fax to that fax number that gets converted to an email, and then my staff prints that up and puts that into the patient's wellness score. Okay? Laura, that makes sense?
Yep, it does. Maybe I want to check to see if anyone's got any questions or.
Okay. So guys, up till now, any questions about what we covered so far? I'm going to look at the questions here. Laura, I'm going to make you an organizer here so you can see the questions as well.
Okay.
Make organizer. You have now just been given the power, Laura. Let's see.
A great tip that another doctor did this morning, and when he started LabCorp, he made himself the first patient at his LabCorp. So he went over there and just checked to make sure that everything was going to run smoothly for his patients, what his patients would expect, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought that was a good suggestion.
Yeah, and the other thing that was Brian Hester, Lauren. The other thing he said, which I thought was really smart, when you get your requisite form, guys, there's a place on there where it's about the billing, and it says patient bill, account bill, or insurance bill. Okay, and let me explain that to you. Patient bill is obviously if the patient has no insurance. Account bill, right, is they're going to bill our account, and that's how you get the $135. So you should always cross out the patient bill. And what he did is he highlighted basically with a Sharpie, a black Sharpie, he highlights through the patient bill. Then you have two choices left, account bill, and the account bill is going to get you the cash price, the $135 special price, and that's only if they don't have insurance that covers the lab. If they have insurance that covers the lab, then you put a Sharpie through that account bill as well, and the only thing that's left for the lab to do is bill the patient's insurance. And that way there's no misunderstanding about who should be billed for the lab work. And I thought that was a really smart idea. What we've done with our requisite form is anything on there, guys, that's consistently the same, so you don't have to fill it out every single time. We've filled it out, and we have kind of just a blank copy that's ready to go with all of the information, like our account information, that is the same every time we give it to a patient. So the only thing then that's left to fill out is the patient's name, the patient's pertinent information each time. But you'll see when you get that requisite form how to fill that out. It's pretty simple. It's a one-page document. Okay? And I don't see any questions so far. So what I would like to do, guys, is I want to show you some of the lab that we use. So I'm going to go into an 8 Weeks to Wellness, a wellness score account, or I was going to. Let's see here. Miles has been having problems with the Cash Practice site today. So let's see if it's working.
Yep.
Very
That's what I got in mine too.
Is that what you got too, Laura?
Yeah.
Let me see if I can log in here. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to see if I can log in through Firefox, and then we'll know whether it is a, let's see here. No. Okay. So we'll have to do this another way. Guys, Miles is having problems with the site. I wanted to show you some case studies, but what I'm going to have to do is bring up a case study by just showing you a picture of a wellness score here. Let's pick a good one here. Choose a different one than we used this morning, Laura. Shall we?
Okay. I think we shall.
I think we shall. All right, so this is actually a patient who recently completed the program, guys. And I really want to show you this because Eric was just such a great example of a great patient. And then I want to also tell you about a couple patients that came in last night because I think their case study is really interesting as to who really needs 8 Weeks to Wellness and who you think may not need 8 Weeks to Wellness, but in fact may need 8 Weeks to Wellness. But let's go through the blood work first. So obviously in our office we use 2 wellness scores. We use the general new patient wellness score that basically it's comprised of all of these parameters: weight, diastolic pressure, BMI, waist to hip fat mass, the surveys, core strength and flexibility, then the chiropractic parameters as well. Okay, so we have the palpation, the posture pro, the x-ray down here. But in the middle here, you'll see all the blood work. And recognize, as I said earlier, we really look at for a couple things. So C-reactive protein is a measurement, and I'll also explain to you how I language this to the patient, okay? So you understand the dialogue that you should use to explain each one of these parameters. So when I'm explaining C-reactive protein, I tell the patient C-reactive protein is a measurement of inflammation in the body. It tells me if there's inflammation, and I liken inflammation to smoke. If there's smoke, there's a fire somewhere. The C-reactive protein doesn't tell us where the fire is, it just tells us whether you're inflamed or not. But obviously inflammation is a precursor or an effect of an underlying disease process. So we want to know where that's coming from. And likely culprits of inflammation are things like an inflammatory diet. You're eating the wrong kinds of food. A suppressed immune system where your immune system isn't responding properly. something that you're being exposed to chemically that's creating inflammation, some sort of damage in the blood vessels where you're getting inflammation in the blood vessels. So it's just not a good thing to have inflammation in the body, and if it's there, we know that we can really have an impact on that through 8 Weeks to Wellness, particularly through the fish oils that we give you, the omega-3s, through the chiropractic you get to really calm down your nervous system, through the diet that we put you on to put you on a low-inflammatory diet, to alkalize your body, to put more greens and antioxidants in your body. These are the things that really help to put out the fire. So that's how I explain that. When I talk about dysglycemia, I tell the patient one of the things that we look at, and this is very interesting, guys, because the last patient that, and let me see it with, yeah, it's the same, it was the exact same thing with the last patient we did earlier today, Regina. She had the exact same thing going on. But recognize when we look at a person's blood sugar, we look at 3 parameters. We look at their fasting glucose, we look at their hemoglobin A1C, and we also look at their insulin. And the way I language this to the patient is that glucose is extremely important that your body manage glucose properly, because glucose is one of the few molecules that crosses into the blood-brain barrier and into your nervous system and your brain and can do damage at high levels. So your body has elaborate systems to keep your blood sugar managed. So some of the things that it will do is it will convert glucose to triglycerides and triglycerides to body fat so that glucose can be stored. Another thing it will do is it will bind glucose to proteins to get it out of the bloodstream. And so one thing it will bind it to so it doesn't cross into the brain is red blood cells. Okay, and red blood cells, we're able to measure the amount of glucose attached to your red blood cells by looking at your hemoglobin A1C. So the higher your hemoglobin A1C, the more glucose you have indirectly, because the more it's being bound to red blood cells so the body can process it. And then finally, we want to see how much insulin you're secreting. So for example, in this case, guys, if you look at Eric's, if all we looked at was his glucose, you would actually say he did worse after the program because his glucose, well, actually not worse, he did a little bit better, but his glucose went from 84 to 82. But oftentimes we'll see it fluctuate the other way where it goes from, if it's normal, it goes from 82 to 84 where it goes up slightly. But if you don't look at the other factors like the A1C and the insulin, you don't get the whole picture. So for example, in this case, he went from 84 to 82, but look at his A1C. His A1C came down from 5.5% to 5.3, and his insulin, he almost cut in half, guys, and it went from 13.3 to 8.3. Now, the case study we looked at this morning, her insulin went from 10 down to 2. She cut her insulin down 5-fold through the program, and that's a much better marker to explain to the patient that your body is responding so much better because you're not cranking out all this insulin. And high insulin has a lot of harmful effects in the body, okay? So that's how we explain the sugar. And then obviously for the lipids, one of the things that we talk about is good and bad cholesterol. Now, I recognize there's no such thing as good and bad cholesterol, but this is the best way I explain it to the patient, okay, is that your body has different forms of cholesterol. And so one of the things that we look at, because it's the best predictor of heart disease, and that's why you manage cholesterol and lipids, because you don't want to have a heart attack or a stroke. So one of the things that we look at is something called your triglyceride to HDL ratio, and this is the best predictor of future heart event or a future cardiovascular event. And so you take your triglycerides and you divide that by your HDL cholesterol. Now, I'll give you a great example. The guy last night who came in to me happened to have his blood work with him. His triglycerides were over 300. They were like 330. And his HDL cholesterol was like 32. So he literally had a 10-to-1 ratio of triglycerides in his blood to HDL cholesterol. That is a very high risk of somebody who is in metabolic syndrome and who's somebody who's likely to get diabetes or heart disease. And when I asked him about it, his father already has type 2 diabetes, and his father is 61 or 62 years old, okay? So very interesting case that came in last night because he had a high triglyceride to HDL ratio, okay? So the other things, again, you want to touch on LDLs, especially if they're over 100, 120. You want to tell them that their bad cholesterol is high. And, guys, I don't think you don't have to go into the low-density lipoproteins and the high-density, and, I don't think you need to go in that depth with the patient as long as you understand it. But it's very important to language out to people that their HDLs For a man, want to be over 40. For a woman, want to be over 50. And the only way that research shows to improve good cholesterol is through exercise. Your LDLs are totally tied to your diet, and we like to see those under 100 in both men and women. And what I always say is we see great changes with both good and bad cholesterol, particularly the bad cholesterol and triglycerides on the 8 Weeks to Wellness program. And if you've been running the program, guys, you know the same thing. Okay? And then on here, not on Eric's, but on the LabCorp one, Eric had his blood work. Eric's wife was an MD, so she ran his labs, but she did not run the homocysteine. So if you have homocysteine on your labs as well, you want to explain that to the patient that homocysteine is a reflection of your B vitamin intake, particularly folic acid. And just so you guys know, homocysteine is a precursor to glutathione synthesis. So glutathione is the #1 antioxidant in the body, cellular antioxidant. And so your body takes folic acid and homocysteine and creates glutathione out of that. And so if you're not manufacturing enough glutathione, a lot of time it's because you don't have the proper B vitamins to convert that homocysteine with cysteine to make glutathione. Okay? And what happens is large levels of homocysteine in the bloodstream is a biomarker for heart disease. Okay? So that's how we explain homocysteine. All right? So I'm going to stop there and see if we have any questions. If you guys have a question, please type it. Yeah. So even Jason Nucci said that cash practice has been acting strange today. It has for me too, Jason. Let me go back and see if I can open up. The cases that I wanted to cover with you guys were so good.
Does Dr. West have a have a question? Dr. Nyberg?
No, it's not working again. He just said that his mic isn't working, Laura.
Oh.
So if he has a question, he would type it in the dialog box.
Awesome.
So guys, cash practice isn't working, but what I want to do is talk about a couple case studies so that you guys have some understanding of who is a good candidate for 8 Weeks to Wellness and who isn't. So I had these two people come in last night, and it's a great learning experience because, first of all, they came from a lunch and learn that I did at my school district about 4 months ago. And it was interesting because the woman, one of the teachers at Council Rock, where I did the lunch and learn talk, she said she was so impressed by the presentation, but she wanted to bring her husband in. And when the husband was in having his posture done, she basically said to me, I really wanted to get him in here because I felt that he needed the program. So it was interesting. They were both in for their exams. And what I do when I go through my day one consult is I break up my, and I do this Everest style, but I break up my consult into healthcare challenges and then healthcare goals. So I always cover the healthcare challenges, and I basically language it like this. I say, listen, if I had a magic wand and I could get rid of any healthcare problems that you're having, pain, headaches, anything that you're taking medication for, what's the most pressing problem or what brought you into this office? And they'll tell you, I have headaches, I have back pain, I'm taking medication for allergies, I'd love to get rid of my allergies. So we kind of focus on healthcare challenges. And then, you know, Everest style, we dig into the #1 healthcare challenge that they're having. So let's say it's headaches. We go into depth in asking them if they've had any trauma, what do the headaches feel like, when was the first time they've noticed them, on and on and on. And that's not the purpose of this coaching call. But then with the healthcare goals is that we look at their healthcare goals. Now, it's interesting with her, her main healthcare challenge is she had a double mastectomy about 5 or 6 years ago and went through chemo, and then her cancer returned about 2 years ago, and she had to go through chemo again. And she was a very pretty woman, very health-conscious woman. You could tell she had a BMI of 19. Her body fat was 23%, which she was 50 years old, which was excellent. She did not look 50 at all. So for all intents and purposes, looking at this woman on the outside, you would never think she was a good candidate for 8 Weeks to Wellness. So physically, she was doing great. She passed all of her core flexibility tests and all of her core strength tests with flying colors. She exercises all the time. Her diet was pristine. When I asked her about her water intake and how she would rate her diet, she rated her diet at a 10 and her water intake at a 12. So obviously she felt like her diet, she was doing a pretty good job. And from the looks of it, she was doing a pretty good job. Now, emotionally, she was riddled with fear. And when I ran her, what I would consider the test her sympathetic nervous system, her HRV, she scored very low. She scored, not very low, but she scored a 72, which is not great. When I palpated her spine, guys, her neck was so jammed up, and she had, and you guys know this, when you get that person that feels like a turtle shell in their cervical thoracic spine where they have absolutely no joint mobility and so much tension in the muscles of their cervical thoracic spine. So when I looked at her x-ray, she was completely kyphotic. I mean, really bad in her neck. And that, to me, is like a cat that's backed into a corner where that nervous system goes into fight or flight, and it really distorts the spine. And that was very evident. This woman is stuck in a fear pattern. And I would be too, guys, if I had gotten cancer, breast cancer, and had it twice now. So it was really affecting her her nervous system. Now, he, on the other hand, was physically a mess and biochemically a mess. He brought in his blood work, and his triglycerides were over 30. He had very low HDL cholesterol, very high LDL cholesterol. His blood glucose was already out of range. They hadn't done his A1C or his insulin, so I didn't know, but his blood glucose was like 101 or 102, which was already out of range, so I can only imagine what his insulin is. So he had, when we looked at it, he had 4 of the 5 parameters for metabolic syndrome. He actually was an athlete, former athlete. He had bad knees from playing basketball, but he moved pretty good. He passed a lot of his core strength tests, but only passed one of his core flexibility tests. So again, he scored an F on his wellness score, and I can't pull it up or I'd show it to you. But he's obviously a great candidate for 8 Weeks to Wellness because of the fact that he has metabolic syndrome, and because of the fact that his BMI was 33.5, and for a 48-year-old man, his body fat came in at 28%, which is very high for a 48-year-old man. A 48-year-old man should not have a waist measurement over 40 inches. He was 44, and should not have a body fat measurement of over 20%. He was 28%. So obviously this guy is perfect for 8 Weeks to Wellness, but let's go back to her. I would not think of this woman as somebody who was a good candidate for 8 Weeks to Wellness. But I have to tell you, now going through and doing her exam, I'm recommending 8 Weeks to Wellness for both of them because she's a perfect candidate. She obviously needs the chiropractic care. She's never been to a chiropractor. She's subluxated. Her nervous system is a mess, and she's in fight or flight. Okay? And the people that do the best on the program are the people that support one another. So when you have a husband and wife that do the program, obviously they're going to exercise together, they're going to cook their meals together, they're going to be able to support one another, and this is really the whole goal of the program. So, I can't say enough things about using the wellness score and really doing a good day one to find out if that person's a good candidate for 8 Weeks to Wellness. Okay? So that's kind of what I wanted to go over. Laura, did you have any input?
Nope. Perfect. Right on.
Okay. And I wish, I'm going to try one more time, guys, to see if I can pull up Cash Practice. Maybe it started working again as we were talking. Oh, wait a minute. And guys, if you have any questions, and it doesn't have to be about what we covered today, it can be about anything, please ask them in the dialog box. All right, let's see here.
I wonder how many doctors on the call today are using blood work on a regular basis.
Oh, great. And guys, that's a great point you bring up, Laura. I ask, and it's on our consult form, on our exam form, I ask every single patient when was the last time they had labs done. And because all you're going to do is get more information. So let's say that it's been 6 months or a year, I will suggest to them, listen, I can send you to LabCorp. Often the lab work is covered by your insurance, and I would love to see your lab values if you haven't had that done in a while. And I'm sure it's something your doctor would like to see as well. So make the suggestion. So many people, because they've been programmed this way, Laura, if I said that to you as a patient, what would you say?
I'd say, great, let's do it.
Awesome, right? Just more information. So here you go, guys. Here was his wellness score, right? And so you can see he was about my size, 240 pounds, slightly elevated diastolic. His resting heart rate was pretty good, but look at his BMI, look at his body fat, his waist circumference, 43 inches. And here's his artificially inflated phase angle because he's so fat. So when you see a high phase angle on a overly fat person, guys, that's a false positive, because if a person has too many fat cells, they're going to have a higher phase angle. His MSQ was high, and again, he only passed one of his core flexibility tests, but was a pretty strong guy. But take a look at his HRV. His HRV was 98. So he scored really well. So where his wife was a mess emotionally, he was actually a really cool guy. You know, we were joking. I could just tell he was not the type of guy that holds on to stress. So he had that going for him. And I told him, I said, listen, if you came in here and you were as stressed out as your wife and you had metabolic syndrome, man, I would recommend that you do 8 weeks to wellness yesterday, because you are like a prime candidate for a heart attack. But the one thing that you have going in your favor right now is the fact that you seem to really be a happy person and a person that manages stress well. And he looked at me and said, I don't take my stress home from work. I leave it there and pick it up the next day. So, you know, just a really cool guy. So he did really good on his heart rate variability, but he was subluxated, and he did pretty good on his posture, and his x-rays were a mess. But you can see his overall score was an F. Now let's take a look at her.
Is she going to do it as well, Dane? Did she agree to it?
Laura, I didn't do their ROF because they came in as patients last night. So, but
Right.
I did their care plans through Cash Practice, both of them, to do 8 weeks to wellness together.
Sure.
And in our office, guys, recognize that we give the second family member a 10% discount. So we give them a 10% off of the $2,700 in office. But if a second member of the family does it, like a husband or a wife, we give them an additional 10% off of the second person. So just take a look at her wellness score, guys. Look at her BMI, 18.6. Her body fat was 24.8%, so she was lower than the range for her age. Look at her waist circumference, 26.5. How often do you see a person with a 26.5-inch waist at the widest part of their waist? You know, but then look at her phase angle. It's very interesting, guys, is that you'll see people that have previous cancer with very low phase angle. Because what does phase angle measure? It measures cell membrane health, right? And this woman was not taking fish oils. Recognize, I ask all of my patients if they're taking three things. Do they take omega-3s? Do they take vitamin D? And do they take probiotic? The only thing she was taking was vitamin D. You know, she was not taking probiotic, and she was not taking omega-3s. So subsequently, she had a very low phase angle, right? And so that's something I will hit on. You know, that was her lowest score of everything. She absolutely needs to be taking fish oil, which she would when she does 8 weeks to wellness. She did good. Now, it's interesting to note, because of her breast cancer, she had a false positive with her core flexibility test. Both her shoulder pass-through and her overhead squat she couldn't do because she had fibrosis and scar tissue from her, she had breast implants from having a mastectomy, so she had a lot of scar tissue in her chest. So she couldn't do the shoulder pass-through or the overhead squat. But I am totally confident, had she not had that scar tissue in her chest, that she would be able to do that. And then you can see her posture. She was so anterior weight-bearing, her posture was 28 degrees, and most of that 28 degrees because she had a very anterior head tilt because she had a kyphosis in her cervical spine. So again, you know, she scored better than her husband, but my question is she as good a candidate for 8 weeks to wellness as her husband? Looking on the outside, you would say no, she doesn't need the program. But really taking a deeper look under the hood and really taking a look at this patient, she's a perfect candidate for 8 weeks to wellness because she needs stress management. She needs to be doing the meditation. She needs to get into the nutritional part of the program and start doing the supplements. She absolutely needs to be adjusted, and she needs to support her husband through the process. So, I mean, this is why we use this wellness score, guys, because it's just, I think it opens up such a great picture of why people need this program. Okay? So,
Awesome.
I'm looking again to see if we have any questions.
Nope, we do not.
Speak now, guys, or forever hold your peace. Questions about what we covered today, or any questions, anything at all, as long as it's not too personal. I don't see any.
It's a quiet group.
It's a quiet group. All right, guys, all you shy people. Next time you better bring questions. I want to know that you're paying attention.
Hey, just for this group, I will just let them know that you're going to get an email shortly. We're going to phase out some of the time options that are available to you guys. And what we want to do is kind of put everyone into two different groups so that everybody's on the same page. Because we're finding that some of the groups, like your group that only meets once a month, you're missing out on a lot of the information that some of the other doctors are getting once a week. So you'll get an email soon on it. You're going to have two options. One's on a Tuesday or one's on a Wednesday. They're going to be every single week. You do not have to come every single week. We're going to send you an agenda ahead of time, and you can kind of pick and choose. If you want to come to every session every week, that'd be awesome. But if you don't, you can kind of pick and choose and see which one, what the topic is, and make your decision.
Yeah, and guys, we're going to record. We're going to record them, but I can only tell you the interaction that happens, like because these groups are large on Tuesday and Wednesday, and there's just, I know, Laura, isn't there great feedback from a lot of the doctors?
So awesome, and just awesome ideas. And one doctor had an issue with LabCorp this morning, and another doctor was able to answer it, and they could talk to each other, and so it was really great.
So there's a great masterminding synergy that takes place in and we're going to do them Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and hopefully, what I hope is to get all the distributors on those two calls so that we can all kind of make sure that we're dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and we'll have this agenda for you so you can see a month in advance the topics that we'll be covering for that month. So I think that's awesome.
Yep, perfect.
All right, guys, so have a great afternoon, and we will talk to you hopefully next week if you guys choose to be on.
All right, sounds good.
Adios.
See you later.
The organizer has